Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into Bangladesh's foreign policy.
That's right. We've got this fascinating audio discussion, 0427.mp3, full of expert takes.
And it sheds light on some major shifts, challenges facing Bangladesh on the world stage.
Mm-hmm.
Think of this as your clear path to understanding the core issues in their international relations.
Exactly. Our mission here is really to pull out the most crucial insights from that audio.
We want to give you a solid grasp of how Bangladesh is handling relationships with, say, India, China, the U.S.
And the big strategic thinking behind it all. The goal is clarity, definitely trying to avoid just drowning you in information.
Okay, so let's kick things off. Where do we start? Maybe the shifts in their foreign policy stance.
Sounds good. Traditionally, it's always been friendship to all, malice toward none. It's right there in their constitution.
A strong guiding principle. But how did that actually look in practice? Especially, say, under the last Awami League government with Sheikh Hasina.
Yeah, that's where it gets interesting. There's a strong perception, and the audio discussion really digs into this, that during her time, there was a definite lean towards India.
Leading how?
Allegations that her government prioritized her power, her party's interests, maybe not always focusing on what was truly reciprocal or best for Bangladesh itself.
And the audio gives examples of this, like preferential treatment for India.
It does cite instances that were seen that way, yes.
So now, with a change in government, the big question is,
Yeah.
does India's influence actually decrease? Or is it more superficial change?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? India's strategic interest isn't likely to just vanish.
Because of geography.
Exactly. Bangladesh's location is just too important for India, especially for connecting to its northeastern states. So India has a vested interest in maintaining, significant influence.
Which brings up that point from the audio about India's general approach to its neighbors,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes seen as a bit of a big brother.
Yeah, the discussion characterizes it that way sometimes. Prioritizing immediate gains, like transit rights or port access.
Without maybe focusing enough on fair compensation or long-term mutual benefit.
That's the critique presented, yes.
Hmm.
A focus perhaps more on extraction than equitable partnership in some views.
And is India's strategy changing now?
Yeah.
The audio seemed to suggest they're not just backing one horse anymore.
Right. It suggests a shift away from relying solely on the Awami League. There seems to be an effort to build ties with various groups, influential figures. Dr. Yunus was mentioned specifically.
Hedging their bets, maybe,
Yeah,
to ensure benefits no matter who's in power.
that seems to be the implication. Maximize advantages regardless of the political landscape in Dhaka.
So it really comes back to that question. How much real autonomy can Bangladesh carve out next to such a powerful neighbor?
A fundamental challenge. And moving beyond India, there's the whole navigating the wider world order.
Right, the global landscape is always shifting. Bangladesh has to adapt its foreign policy constantly.
It does. Its location makes it important to many countries, that's clear.
But the discussion highlighted something interesting. It doesn't have that one single dominant ally, like,
Right.
say, the U.S. for Israel or maybe China for Pakistan.
No, it's navigating a more complex web. And what comes through strongly in the audio is that economic goals have to drive foreign policy.
You see that in the trade figures,
Yeah.
right? A surplus with the U.S., but a big deficit with China.
Precisely. It illustrates the different economic realities they're juggling.
So the balancing act is key. Can't lean too far towards China or the U.S. without upsetting the other.
That seems to be the strategic necessity. Keep the economic benefits flowing from both sides if possible, without getting pulled too deep into one camp.
Which leads us neatly into U.S.-Bangladesh relations. Things seem a bit uncertain there, especially after the Trump era.
Definitely fluid. And the audio suggests that Dr. Yunus's recent activities could potentially influence that future relationship.
How so? What kind of initiatives?
Well, one example mentioned was helping bring Western visa application centers directly to Bangladesh.
Ah, so reducing the need to go through India for those kinds of things.
Exactly. Small steps, maybe, but they could offer long-term benefits for future governments, increasing that sense of autonomy.
And the broader point there seems to be protecting things that bring economic benefit to Bangladesh, even if there's pressure from outside, maybe from India.
Yes, safeguarding those wins seems critical.
What about the economy itself? The ready-made garment sector is huge for Bangladesh. Are there worries there?
The discussion raises potential issues, yeah, like the possibility of India hindering transshipments.
Which would make direct export capabilities even more vital for Bangladesh.
Absolutely. It underlines that push towards greater economic self-reliance, reducing dependency, especially on India,
And the key to that.
leveraging that massive population by building up technical skills, technical expertise. That's highlighted as a major pathway.
Now, the audio also touched on something sensitive, U.S. involvement in recent political changes, like the July movement and Sheikh Hasina leaving power. Was the U.S. directly involved?
Well, the expert perspective in the audio leans away from direct intervention. It paints the U.S. more as a passive observer, primarily concerned with stability in the region.
Interesting, because there was that mention of Trump's view.
Right, that he reportedly saw Bangladesh as mainly India's concern, denying direct U.S. involvement when asked.
And Peter Hawes, the U.S. ambassador, his actions during the election.
Interpreted in the audio not as pushing for regime change, but more as encouraging an inclusive election, stability being the main U.S. priority, it seems.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Water diplomacy and border issues with India, always a difficult area.
And the audio points out Bangladesh consistently tries to stick to its friendship to all policy despite these challenges.
But the water sharing, that's a major point of friction, isn't it?
Definitely. The discussion highlights how India's management of shared rivers, like the Teesta releasing or holding back water based on its own needs, often creates significant problems downstream for Bangladesh. Agriculture, water supply.
And it begs the question, why does Bangladesh seem to struggle to get traction on this? Especially compared to how India and Pakistan handle their water issues, even with China involved sometimes.
It's a tough one. The expert view in the audio is basically India will likely keep prioritizing its interests.
So what can Bangladesh do? Just keep raising it.
Raising it is crucial, yes. But the audio also acknowledges that international rules, UN resolutions, they often don't hold much sway with powerful nations when core interests are at stake.
So the real long-term solution, according to this analysis,
Seems to be building more economic clout and, significantly, military strength. Enough to make India pay more attention and ensure fair treatment.
because things like border killings or transit routes without fair compensation, the audio frames these as unacceptable.
Very strongly. There's a call for a mechanism where India's benefits are clearly tied to providing reciprocal benefits to Bangladesh. Like, you want transit. Okay, what about guaranteed water flow?
Makes sense. And a strong defense is part of that leverage.
Seen as fundamental for independence, internal needs, and yes, for that diplomatic leverage.
But modernizing the military is a challenge. Keeping up with global tech.
A huge challenge. The audio mentions the gap, how quickly technology advances elsewhere. Using U.S. defense cycles as an example, it's hard to keep pace.
Which brings us to strategic deterrence. Professor Salamullah's name came up regarding nuclear capability.
It was mentioned briefly, yes, but the audio quickly points out the massive complexities and how improbable that is for Bangladesh. It's not seen as a realistic path.
And so the focus shifts back to building what you can build, indigenous capabilities.
Exactly. Bridging that gap between, say, engineering education and actual practical application in defense industries.
And that requires a really focused approach.
Absolutely. Skill development, boosting local production, smart joint ventures, not repeating past mistakes like that abandoned deep-sea port project in Chittagong mentioned in the audio.
That sounds like a missed opportunity. Are there internal roadblocks too? Vested interests, maybe?
The discussion does touch on that possibility, yeah. How internal politics can sometimes undermine good strategic decisions.
And the importance of technical expertise comes up again,
Yeah.
especially for negotiating deals.
Critically important. You need people who understand the technology, the finances, the long-term implications, so Bangladesh isn't outmaneuvered and gets deals that genuinely serve its interests.
Plus basic communication skills,
Yeah.
like English proficiency for international negotiations.
Essential on the global stage, definitely.
Okay, let's talk about China's role, particularly in the defense sector. They're a major arms supplier, right?
Yes, the audio confirms that China is a key source of military equipment for Bangladesh.
But are there concerns, like about the equipment itself or support?
There are. The discussion raises questions about long-term sustainability, maintenance, the need for deals to include comprehensive packages, training, ongoing technical support, the whole thing,
And China's interest isn't just selling arms, presumably. There's a strategic angle.
likely. The audio suggests China's investments might also be about creating a strategic counterbalance to India in the region.
So what does Bangladesh need to do to attract continued positive Chinese engagement?
Stability is key, according to the analysis, and continued infrastructure development. Those make it an attractive place for investment.
And what about that big trade imbalance with China? Bangladesh imports way more than it exports to China.
That's a major point. The need to seriously boost exports to China is crucial for a healthier economic relationship.
How? China offers duty-free access for many goods, doesn't it?
It does. The audio stresses leveraging that access better. That means a laser focus on improving quality control to meet Chinese market standards.
And targeting sectors where China imports a lot.
Exactly. Like ready-made garments, leather goods, seafood, maybe agricultural products, capitalizing on Bangladesh's potentially cheaper labor, but ensuring the quality is there.
Shifting focus again. What about Pakistan? The idea of using Pakistani ports came up.
An interesting strategic thought, yes. Using ports like Gwadar or Karachi to potentially improve trade links with Central Asia or the Middle East.
But that's loaded with history and geopolitics, isn't it? Bangladesh and Pakistan?
Absolutely. The complex history is unavoidable. But purely from a trade logistics angle, the audio suggests exploring the potential benefits.
Especially maybe linking into China's Belt and Road Initiative.
That's part of the potential synergy, yes. The discussion even floats the idea of joint ventures with Pakistan, maybe in defense, where Pakistan has a more developed industry combined with Bangladesh's workforce.
But that historical baggage, the 1971 war, the need for an apology from Pakistan, that's still present.
Very much so. The audio touches on that tension between acknowledging history and pursuing what might seem like, well, political or economic expediency today.
Okay, let's zoom out to the Indo-Pacific.
Mm.
Is there a concern that Bangladesh could get sort of caught in the middle? Used by China, perhaps, leading to issues with the U.S.?
That concern exists, yes. But the expert perspective in the audio pushes back against viewing everything as rigid alliances against someone. Meaning, the priority for Bangladesh should always be its own national interest. Engage with different partners, sure, but don't do anything that jeopardizes your core security or economic needs.
And China's view on using Bangladesh for transit, is it seen as a threat?
The audio presents China's perspective as seeing it more as complementary, mutually beneficial, not necessarily aimed at other regional players.
And things like joint military exercises with Pakistan.
Framed in the discussion as a pretty normal military-to-military cooperation, not necessarily a major strategic realignment.
Now, there's a comparison made with Vietnam's strategy towards the U.S. What was that about?
Vietnam apparently made a proactive effort, lowering tariffs on U.S. goods to sort of curry favor and attract businesses looking for alternatives to China or India.
And the suggestion is Bangladesh could maybe try something similar.
Potentially, yes. Strategically increase imports from the U.S. to build goodwill and strengthen that trade relationship.
What kind of U.S. goods?
The audio mentions several possibilities. Agricultural stuff like cotton, soybean oil, wheat, industrial materials, machinery, maybe defense equipment, even LNG.
But for that to work, Bangladesh would need to get its own house in order first.
That's the crucial caveat. Improving the regulatory environment, labor laws, enforcement, and definitely boosting those quality control standards for anything being exported, meeting international requirements consistently.
What about foreign military bases on Bangladeshi soil? Any appetite for that?
The expert view in the audio was clearly against it. The emphasis was strongly on building Bangladesh's own defense capabilities, not relying on foreign bases.
And does that align with how China usually operates?
Generally, yes. The audio notes that the Chinese model, in most places, focuses more on economic ties, infrastructure projects, rather than establishing permanent military bases abroad.
Interesting. Okay, finally, the discussion touched on shifts in American foreign policy itself, moving beyond the old 3D model.
Yeah, defense diplomacy, development. There's a sense that maybe the approach is evolving.
And a reminder about the fundamental nature of international relations.
That nations are inherently competitive, and prioritizing your own national interests is just, well, how the game is played. That's strongly emphasized.
Which loops back to the importance of intelligence, doesn't it?
Absolutely critical. Good intelligence gathering and analysis for national defense. And the audio specifically flags the risk of infiltration by neighbors with their own agendas.
So Bangladesh needs a strong, independent intelligence service.
That's the conclusion. Maybe collaborating with others strategically, but always focused on protecting Bangladesh's own secrets and interests.
Right. So wrapping up this deep dive then, it really feels like Bangladesh is at a pretty crucial point in its foreign policy.
Definitely navigating some complex waters, balancing these major global powers.
And the big takeaway from the audio seems to be the need for a more, maybe assertive, strategically calculated approach.
I think so. Prioritizing economic benefits, really doubling down on building those indigenous capabilities, defense, technical skills, and just being adaptable to this changing world.
Hopefully, diving into that audio gave you, our listener, some real aha moments.
Yeah, things like the subtle shifts in India's influence, that tightrope walk between the US and China, and just how vital building a strong, independent Bangladesh is.
Now, something to think about is how all this plays out domestically. What role does public opinion, internal politics actually have in shaping these big foreign policy choices?
That's a great follow-up question, and here's a final thought to leave you with.
Go on.
Considering everything, the history, the current geopolitics, what's the single most impactful thing Bangladesh could realistically do now to truly secure its long-term strategic interests, to get a more equitable footing in its international dealings?
And what tough choices might that involve?
Exactly, something to ponder.